The sun rose bright and golden over London on Coronation Day. Light came through the windows of the royal palace as the city woke up to a special day in history. Today was the day King Charles would be crowned. But this story is not just about the new king. It is about three small royals who would capture everyone's hearts: Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. In their royal rooms, the children were getting ready. Helpers moved all around them, fixing clothes and giving last tips about what to do during the big event. 9-year-old Prince George stood in front of a tall mirror. He wore a special outfit made just for this day. His blue eyes looked serious as he practiced his bow one more time. He knew this day was important. One day, he would be king too. This thought made his small chest fill with pride, but also made his stomach feel funny with nerves. His mother, Kate, came to check on him. She wore a beautiful white dress with small diamonds that caught the light. When she saw George trying so hard to be perfect, her face softened with love. "You look very handsome," she said, fixing his collar gently. "Are you ready?" George nodded, but his eyes showed his worry. "What if I make a mistake? Everyone will be watching." Kate bent down so her eyes were level with his. "Just remember what we practiced. And remember that your father and I are so proud of you, no matter what." These words made George stand a little taller. He gave his mother a small smile that showed the gap where he had lost a tooth last week. Even future kings lost baby teeth. In the next room, 7-year-old Charlotte was sitting still as someone fixed her hair with small white flowers. Her dress was white and simple, but made her look like a princess from a storybook. Charlotte was excited. She loved special events and being dressed up. She kept looking at herself in the mirror, turning her head to see how the flowers looked from all sides. "Will I get to wear a small crown today?" she asked the woman doing her hair. The woman smiled and shook her head. "Not today, princess, but you have these lovely flowers instead." Charlotte nodded, trying not to look disappointed. She had been hoping for at least a tiny tiara. But she was a good princess who knew how to hide her feelings when needed. Her mother had taught her that. In his room, 5-year-old Prince Louis was causing a small storm. He did not want to wear his special clothes. He wanted to wear his favorite dinosaur shirt instead. 2 helpers were trying to reason with him while he jumped on his bed. "But it's itchy," Louis said, pulling at his collar. "And boring. Can I bring Rex?" Rex was his stuffed dinosaur that went everywhere with him. Just then, his father William walked in. When Louis saw him, he stopped jumping right away. His father looked very royal and important today. "Having trouble, are we?" William asked, but his eyes were kind. He sat on the bed next to Louis. "I know these clothes aren't comfortable. When I was your age, I hated them too." Louis looked up with big eyes. "Really? You did?" William nodded. "Really. But sometimes we do things that aren't fun because they're important. Today is very important for your grandfather. And guess what? After it's all done, we can come home and put on comfortable clothes and have ice cream." Louis thought about this deal. 2 scoops. 2 scoops, William agreed with a smile. With the promise of ice cream, Louis finally agreed to get dressed. Soon, he looked like a proper little prince, though his hair still stuck up a bit in the back. Downstairs, the royal cars waited to take them to Westminster Abbey. Through the palace windows, they could see crowds of people lining the streets. Many had camped overnight just to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Kate gathered her children in a small room for one last check. "Remember," she said softly, "millions of people will be watching today. But just be yourselves. That's what everyone loves most about you 3. The children nodded, each feeling the weight of the day differently. George stood straight and serious. Charlotte checked her dress one last time. And Louis was already looking out the window, wondering how fast the royal cars would go. It was time to go. The coronation was about to begin, and the world was waiting to see the little royals who would bring heart to this historic day. The royal cars waited outside the palace, shining in the morning sun. Each car was black and polished so well that people could see their faces in it. Flags with royal colors flew from the front. Inside, the seats were soft red leather. These were not normal cars. These were special cars for a special day. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis followed their parents out of the palace. Outside, they heard the crowd for the first time. The noise was huge. Thousands of people were cheering and calling out to see the royal children. Some people had slept on the streets just to be there. They held flags and took pictures with their phones. George walked carefully, just like he had practiced. He kept his back straight and his face serious. But inside, his heart beat fast with excitement. This was the biggest day of his life so far. He felt proud to walk next to his father. Charlotte waved to the crowd with her hand turned just right, the way her mother had taught her. She loved when people called her name. Her smile grew bigger when she saw signs that said, "We love Princess Charlotte." She tried to count how many there were, but there were too many. Louis held tight to his mother's hand. His eyes grew wide at all the noise and people. He had never seen so many faces looking at him at once. He forgot all about being bored in his itchy clothes. Now he was curious about everything. "Look, Mummy, that lady has a crown too," he said, pointing at someone in the crowd wearing a plastic crown. "Yes, darling. Many people are celebrating today," Kate said, gently putting his pointing hand down. It was not polite to point, even for a small prince. The family got into the first car. William and Kate sat facing backward. The children sat facing forward so they could see out the big windows. As the car started to move, the children pressed their faces to the glass. The streets of London had changed. There were flags everywhere. Red, white, and blue covered every building. People stood 10 deep on both sides of the road. They waved and took pictures as the royal car passed. "Wave to the people," William reminded them. "They have waited a long time to see you." The 3 children waved. George waved the way his father did, with small, careful movements. Charlotte waved like her mother, turning her wrist back and forth. Louis waved with his whole arm, so excited that he almost hit the car roof. The people loved it. They cheered louder when they saw the children waving. Many took pictures that would be shared around the world in minutes. "Why are they so happy to see us?" Louis asked. He did not understand why strangers would wait hours just to see him pass by in a car. "Because you are part of the story of our country," Kate explained in simple words. "Today is a day people will remember forever. And you 3 are a special part of it." Louis thought about this. He was only 5, but he knew his family was different from others. Not every child rode in cars with flags while people cheered. As they got closer to Westminster Abbey, the crowds grew even bigger. Police officers on horses made sure the road stayed clear. The car moved slowly through the sea of people. Inside Westminster Abbey, thousands more people waited. There were kings and queens from other countries. There were famous people and important leaders, and all of them would be watching the royal children too. Charlotte suddenly felt nervous. "What if I forget what to do?" she whispered to George. "Just copy me," he whispered back. "I memorized everything." Charlotte felt better. Her big brother always knew what to do. She would just follow him. The car stopped in front of the huge doors of Westminster Abbey. The building was very old and very big. It reached up to the sky with stone towers and pointed tops. Inside, kings and queens had been crowned for hundreds of years. When the car door opened, the sound of the crowd hit them like a wave. It was time. The coronation was about to begin. William stepped out first, then turned to help Kate. The 3 children followed, blinking in the bright light of cameras. George took a deep breath. Charlotte stood up extra straight. Louis looked around with big, curious eyes. Together, they walked toward the doors of Westminster Abbey, ready to be part of history. The huge wooden doors of Westminster Abbey opened wide. The royal family stood at the entrance for a moment. Inside, the abbey was like a different world. It was cool and dark after the bright sunshine outside. The noise of the crowds faded away. Now they could hear soft music playing. George, Charlotte, and Louis looked up in wonder. The ceiling was so high it seemed to touch the sky. Stone arches crossed above them like the branches of giant trees. Colored light came through stained glass windows, making patterns on the floor. "It looks like magic," Charlotte whispered. A man in a red and gold outfit came to meet them. He bowed to William and Kate. Then he showed them where to go. The children had practiced this many times, but now it felt different. This was real. The abbey was full of people. Every seat was taken. Kings and queens from other countries sat in the front rows. Famous people, leaders and friends of the royal family filled the other seats. Everyone turned to look as the children walked past. George walked in front with his father. His steps were careful and measured. He remembered everything he had been told. Walk slowly. Keep your head up. Look straight ahead. His eyes stayed fixed on the long red carpet that led to the front of the abbey. Charlotte walked next to her mother. She tried to copy Kate's graceful steps. Charlotte felt very grown up and important. She noticed that many people smiled when they saw her. She gave small smiles back, just as she had been taught. Louis held tight to his mother's hand. There was so much to see that his head kept turning from side to side. The abbey was filled with flowers and gold decorations. Guards in bright red uniforms stood along the walls. Louis thought they looked like his toy soldiers come to life. "Look at the soldiers," he whispered loudly to his mother. "Shh." Kate reminded him gently. "Remember, we need to be quiet now." The family reached their special seats near the front of the abbey. These seats were just for them. They were covered in red velvet with gold trim. William helped the children sit down. Louis bounced a little on his seat to test how soft it was. From their seats, they could see the throne where King Charles would sit. It was a big wooden chair with gold decorations. The royal crown sat on a cushion nearby. The crown was heavy with jewels that sparkled in the light. "That will be Grandpa's crown," George told his siblings in a whisper. "And one day it will be Father's. And then one day it will be mine." Charlotte looked at her brother with big eyes. Sometimes she forgot that George would be king someday. It seemed like a story, not real life. Louis was more interested in the music that filled the abbey. A choir of children in white robes was singing. Their voices were high and clear, like birds. Louis started to sway with the music. He loved to sing and dance at home. "When does Grandpa come?" he asked, already getting restless. "Soon," William promised. "Remember to sit still and be quiet when he comes in." The music changed. It became louder and more grand. Trumpets joined in with a bright, exciting sound. This was the signal that the ceremony was about to begin. Everyone in the abbey stood up. The royal children stood too. George stood tall and straight. Charlotte smoothed her dress one last time. Louis stood on his tiptoes, trying to see better. The doors at the far end of the abbey opened again. A long line of people began to walk in. There were men carrying big gold sticks. There were ladies in beautiful dresses carrying flowers. There were important church people in fancy robes. And then, at the end of the line, came King Charles. He wore a long red robe with white fur. It was so long that helpers had to carry it behind him. On his head was a simple gold circle. The big crown would come later. The abbey grew very quiet. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The coronation was beginning. History was happening right in front of the royal children's eyes. George, Charlotte, and Louis watched with wonder as their grandfather walked slowly toward the throne. They knew this day would be something they would remember for the rest of their lives. King Charles walked slowly to the front of Westminster Abbey. The royal children watched their grandfather move with care and purpose. His red robe with gold designs trailed behind him. The abbey was so quiet that they could hear the soft sound of his footsteps on the stone floor. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood waiting. He wore white and gold robes. He would lead the ceremony today, just as archbishops had done for hundreds of years. He smiled at King Charles and bowed his head. George sat very still, his eyes fixed on every move. He had been told about all the parts of the ceremony. Now he was seeing them happen for real. His face was serious and thoughtful. One day, this would be his ceremony too. Charlotte sat with her back straight, just like her mother. She folded her hands neatly in her lap. The colored lights from the windows made patterns on her white dress. She felt very grown up today, like a real princess in a storybook. Louis was trying his best to sit still, but it was hard. The wooden seat was not very comfortable. The ceremony seemed to have a lot of talking. He swung his feet back and forth under his seat. His father put a gentle hand on his knee to remind him to be still. The archbishop began to speak in a loud, clear voice. He asked King Charles if he would serve the people, be fair and kind, and protect the church. King Charles answered yes to all these questions. Then came a part that made the children sit up straighter. The choir began to sing a beautiful song. The music filled the huge space of the abbey. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. Charlotte loved music. She began to sway gently to the sound. Her lips moved silently with the words she knew. Kate noticed and gave her daughter a warm smile. After the music, there was a special moment. King Charles sat in a big wooden chair. The archbishop took a small glass bottle filled with holy oil. He made a cross shape on King Charles's head with the oil. "What is he doing?" Louis whispered to his brother. "He is blessing Grandpa," George whispered back. "It means God will help him be a good king." Louis nodded, trying to understand. It all seemed very strange to him, but also important. Next came the most exciting part. A man in a red uniform brought forward a pillow. On it sat the crown. It was made of gold and covered in jewels. It sparkled in the light. George leaned forward in his seat. The crown was the most important part of the ceremony. It was the same crown that his father would wear one day. And after that, it would be his turn. The archbishop lifted the crown high so everyone could see it. Then, slowly and carefully, he placed it on King Charles's head. At that exact moment, bells began to ring. Their sound was loud and joyful. The people in the abbey stood up and said together, "God save the king." Their voices joined as one. The royal children stood too. George said the words clearly and proudly. Charlotte said them softly, but with feeling. Louis said them a little late, after hearing everyone else. Then something unexpected happened. Louis looked at the crown on his grandfather's head and said in a voice that was a bit too loud, "It's very big, Mummy. Will it fall off?" Several people nearby heard him and smiled. Kate put her finger to her lips, but her eyes were kind. William had to hide a smile behind his hand. King Charles did not hear Louis's question. He was walking to the throne now, with the heavy crown on his head. He had to walk very straight to keep it balanced. When he sat on the throne, he looked royal and important. The archbishop gave King Charles a gold ball and a special stick called a scepter. These were symbols of his power as king. With the crown, ball, and scepter, Charles was now fully the king. Music filled the abbey again. This time it was louder and more joyful. Trumpets played a happy tune. The choir sang with big, full voices. George watched everything with serious eyes, taking mental notes for his future. Charlotte swayed to the music, caught up in the beauty of it all. And Louis, despite his best efforts, let out a big yawn. The ceremony had been going on for a long time, and he was getting tired. Kate saw the yawn and gave Louis a small wink. Even on this big, important day, he was still just a little boy, and that was perfectly fine. The coronation ceremony continued with many old traditions. There were prayers and songs. Important people came forward to bow to the new king. Everyone in Westminster Abbey watched with respect, but many eyes kept moving back to the royal children. Louis was finding it harder and harder to sit still. The ceremony had been going on for more than an hour now. His small legs ached from sitting. The wooden seat felt harder and harder. He tried to be good, but he was only 5 years old. Kate noticed her youngest son getting restless. She leaned close to him and whispered something in his ear. Louis nodded, but a minute later he was moving again. This time, he was looking all around the abbey, his head turning from side to side. He noticed something interesting high up on the ceiling. It was a colorful painting of angels with wings. Louis pointed up at it and tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mummy, look at the flying people," he said. His voice was louder than he meant it to be. Several people turned to look. Some smiled at the little prince. Kate gently lowered his pointing finger and whispered to him again. Charlotte noticed her brother getting in trouble. She leaned toward him and offered him a small candy from her pocket. She always kept a sweet treat for emergencies. Louis took it with a big smile. For a few minutes, he was quiet again as he enjoyed the candy. The archbishop was now giving a long speech about the duties of a king. George listened carefully to every word, but even he was getting a bit tired now. The abbey was warm with so many people inside. The smell of flowers and candles filled the air. Louis finished his candy. He was bored again. He started to make faces at some of the guards standing nearby. The guards had to stay completely still and serious. It was their job not to smile or move. Louis thought this was a fun game. Could he make them laugh? He crossed his eyes and stuck out his tongue. Then he puffed out his cheeks like a fish. The guards kept their serious faces, but some people in nearby seats noticed what Louis was doing. They tried not to laugh. William saw what was happening. He reached over and put his hand on Louis's shoulder. His look was gentle but firm. Louis stopped making faces and tried to sit still again. The archbishop finally finished his speech. There was another song from the choir. This one was faster and more fun. Louis perked up at the change in music. He began to bounce a little in his seat, moving with the rhythm. Charlotte joined him, swaying gently. Even George tapped his foot very quietly. The music was a nice break from all the serious talking. Then something happened that no one expected. Right in the middle of the song, Louis let out a big, loud yawn. He stretched his arms wide above his head, not caring who saw him. Then he rubbed his eyes with his fists. It was such a normal, childlike thing to do in this very formal setting that people couldn't help but smile. Some even laughed softly. In that moment, Louis reminded everyone that kings and ceremonies were one thing, but children would always be children. Kate tried to look serious, but her eyes were full of laughter. William shook his head, but he was smiling too. They knew their youngest son was just being himself. Camera people who were filming the ceremony caught Louis's big yawn. Within minutes, pictures of it were being shared around the world. People everywhere were smiling at the little prince who couldn't hide how he felt. Next came a quiet part of the ceremony. King Charles was praying silently on his knees. Everyone in the abbey was supposed to be quiet and still. Louis tried his very best. He folded his hands like his brother and sister. He closed his eyes tight. But after 10 seconds, one eye popped open. He looked around to see if anyone else had their eyes open. He caught a camera person looking at him. Louis gave the camera a big smile and a little wave. Again, people watching on TV around the world smiled at the little prince being so real and unfiltered. In a ceremony full of rules and traditions, Louis was bringing a breath of fresh air. As the prayers ended, Louis whispered to his mother, loud enough for people nearby to hear, "Is it almost over? I'm hungry." Kate whispered back, "Almost done. You're doing very well." Louis sighed loudly and leaned against his mother's arm. He might be a prince, but right now he was just a tired little boy ready for lunch. And somehow, that made the royal family seem more real and relatable to everyone watching. While Louis was stealing attention with his natural childlike behavior, Princess Charlotte was having her own special moment. The choir began to sing a new song. It was an old hymn that the royal family had sung at home many times. Charlotte knew every word by heart. As the beautiful voices filled Westminster Abbey, Charlotte sat up straighter. Her eyes lit up with recognition. This was her favorite song. Kate noticed her daughter's excitement and gave her an encouraging smile. The choir sang the first verse. Their voices rose to the high ceiling and seemed to make the colored windows glow even brighter. Charlotte's lips began to move silently, matching each word perfectly. By the second verse, Charlotte was singing along very softly. She did not mean for anyone to hear her. She was just so happy to know this song that she couldn't help joining in. Her voice was small but clear and sweet. People sitting close to the royal family noticed the little princess singing. They exchanged warm smiles. It was touching to see how much the music moved her. One of the camera people filming the ceremony noticed too. They zoomed in on Charlotte's face as she sang. On television screens around the world, people could now see Princess Charlotte singing with her whole heart. Her eyes were bright and focused. She wasn't singing to be seen or to perform. She was singing because the music touched something deep inside her. Kate put her arm around Charlotte's shoulders. Instead of asking her to be quiet, she encouraged her daughter to keep singing. This was a moment of real joy in the middle of the formal ceremony. Even George, who was trying so hard to be perfect and proper, turned to look at his sister with a small smile. He was proud of her, but also a little jealous. Charlotte was doing something she loved without worrying about being perfect. The choir director noticed Charlotte singing too. He caught her eye and gave her a tiny nod of approval. Charlotte's smile grew even bigger. She felt like she was part of the music, part of this historic day in a special way. When the hymn ended, Charlotte gave a happy sigh. For those few minutes, she had forgotten about being a princess who had to follow rules. She had just been a little girl who loved music. William leaned across to whisper to his daughter, "That was beautiful, Charlotte. Grandpa would have loved to hear you." Charlotte beamed with pride. She hoped that maybe later she could sing for her grandfather properly. She wanted to show him that she had been practicing. The ceremony continued with more traditions. There were special prayers for the new king. There were promises made by important people. Through it all, Charlotte now seemed more relaxed and happy. Her musical moment had given her confidence. A lady sitting behind the royal family passed a note to Kate. Kate read it quickly and then showed it to Charlotte. It was a message from the choir director. It said, "Princess Charlotte has a beautiful voice. Perhaps she would like to sing with the choir someday." Charlotte's eyes grew wide with excitement. Singing with the real choir in Westminster Abbey was something she had never even dreamed of. She looked back at the choir with new interest. The children in white robes didn't seem much older than she was. For the rest of the ceremony, Charlotte paid special attention to the choir. She watched how they stood, how they held their music, how they watched the director. She was studying them, just like George studied the king. When another hymn began, Charlotte joined in again, this time with more confidence. Her voice blended with the hundreds of others in the abbey, but people nearby could still hear her clear, sweet tones. Louis, who had been getting restless again, quieted down to listen to his sisters sing. Even he could tell that something special was happening. He watched Charlotte with curious eyes. One of the choir boys heard Charlotte singing and smiled at her. Charlotte smiled back. Maybe they would sing together someday. The thought made her feel warm inside. As the song ended, Charlotte caught her father watching her with a look of surprise and pride. She didn't usually show this confident side of herself in public. Today, the music had brought out a new part of her that people hadn't seen before. Kate squeezed her daughter's hand. "You have a gift," she whispered. "Never be afraid to share it." Charlotte nodded. She would remember this day not just as her grandfather's coronation, but as the day she discovered something important about herself. Music could help her be brave. Music could help her shine in her own special way. While his younger siblings were capturing hearts with their spontaneous moments, Prince George was carrying a different kind of responsibility. As the ceremony moved into its final stage, George knew his special moment was coming. The Archbishop announced that special guests would now present gifts to the new king. These gifts were symbols of King Charles's new role. Each person who brought a gift had been chosen carefully, and Prince George was one of them. George sat up even straighter when he heard the announcement. His father gave him an encouraging nod. They had practiced this many times at home. George knew exactly what to do. But knowing and doing were different things. His hands felt cold. His heart beat faster. Everyone in the Abbey would be watching him. Millions more people would be watching on television. What if he made a mistake? What if he tripped or dropped the gift? Kate noticed her son's nervous look. She leaned close and whispered, "Just breathe, George. You're ready for this." George took a deep breath. He reminded himself that one day he would be king. This was just the first of many formal duties in his life. He had to be brave. The Archbishop called for the first gift-bearer. It was not George's turn yet. He watched carefully as others went forward with their gifts. Each person walked slowly to the king, bowed, and presented their gift. King Charles smiled and thanked each one. Finally, the Archbishop called, His Royal Highness Prince George of Wales, bearing the royal orb. This was it. George stood up. His legs felt shaky, but he kept his face calm. William gave his son's shoulder a quick squeeze of support. George walked slowly toward his grandfather. He carried a small cushion. On it was a golden ball with a cross on top. This was a smaller version of the real royal orb, made specially for George to carry. Everyone in the Abbey watched the young prince. The cameras followed his every step. George kept his eyes fixed straight ahead. He concentrated on walking steadily, on not tripping on the long red carpet. When he reached King Charles, George bowed his head just as he had practiced. Then he held out the cushion with the golden orb. His hands were steady now. The moment had given him a strange new calmness. King Charles looked at his grandson with pride shining in his eyes. This was not just a king accepting a gift. This was a grandfather seeing the future king. It was a special link between past, present, and future. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness," King Charles said in a formal voice. But then he added softly, just for George to hear, "Well done, George. Very proud of you." George's serious face broke into a small, real smile. Those quiet words meant more to him than all the ceremony. He bowed again, and then stepped back. Now came the hardest part. George had to walk backward 3 steps before turning around. This was an old tradition, to show respect to the king. Walking backward without being able to see where you're going is not easy, especially when everyone is watching. George took 1 step back, then another. He kept his balance perfectly. On the 3rd step, he made a careful turn and began walking back to his seat. His shoulders relaxed a little. He had done it without any mistakes. When George returned to his seat, William patted his back. Kate's eyes were shining with tears of pride. Even Charlotte and Louis looked impressed with their big brother. "That was perfect," Charlotte whispered to him. Louis added, "You didn't fall over." George tried not to smile at Louis's comment, but a small grin escaped anyway. Trust his little brother to say exactly what he was thinking. For the rest of the ceremony, George sat with a new confidence. He had faced his fear and completed his royal duty. He felt different somehow, a little bit older, a little bit more ready for his future role. Later, when the Archbishop placed a small silver ring on a chain around George's neck, the prince understood what it meant. It was a symbol that one day, he too would wear the crown. One day, he would sit where his grandfather sat now. The weight of the silver ring felt heavy, but not in a bad way. It was like a promise, a connection to all the kings who had come before. George touched it gently with his fingers and made a silent promise to be worthy of it when his time came. As the ceremony began to draw to a close, George noticed something important. Yes, being royal meant duties and traditions, and sometimes being nervous in front of crowds, but looking at his family beside him. He knew it also meant having people who understood, who supported you, who were proud of you no matter what. His grandfather was now King Charles. His father would be king one day. And after that, it would be his turn. But today, he was still just George, a 9-year-old boy who had done something difficult and done it well. And that felt pretty good. The coronation ceremony was finally coming to an end. It had been a long morning for everyone, especially the children. Louis was now leaning heavily against his mother's side. Charlotte was sitting very still, trying to look attentive even though she was tired. George remained alert, not wanting to miss any part of this important day. The Archbishop gave a final blessing. The choir sang one last song. Then King Charles stood up, wearing his crown and holding his royal symbols. It was time to leave the abbey. The royal family stood too. They would follow the king out in a special order. First would be King Charles, then Queen Camilla. Then William and Kate would follow with their children. Remember to walk slowly, Kate reminded her children as they prepared to leave their seats. And keep smiling. Louis perked up at this. The most exciting part of the day was still coming. After leaving Westminster Abbey, they would all go to Buckingham Palace. There, they would stand on the famous balcony and wave to the huge crowds. Louis had been looking forward to this part all day. The grand doors of Westminster Abbey opened. King Charles walked out first, his red robe trailing behind him. The crowd outside cheered so loudly that the sound rushed into the abbey like a wave. Charlotte's eyes widened at the noise. George straightened his shoulders. Louis bounced a little on his toes, suddenly not tired anymore. It was their turn to walk out into the sunshine and the cheers. As the royal children stepped outside, the cheering grew even louder. People had been waiting for hours to see them. Flags waved everywhere. Camera flashes made bright lights in the crowd. Wave to the people, William reminded them. All three children waved as they walked to the waiting cars. George waved in a dignified way, like his father. Charlotte gave her princess wave, turning her hand gracefully. Louis waved with his whole arm, his face bright with excitement. The drive to Buckingham Palace was short but exciting. People lined the whole route, 10 or more deep in some places. They held signs that said things like, "We love our royal children," and "Long live the king." When they arrived at the palace, the children were taken inside to have a quick lunch and a short rest. They all needed a break after the long ceremony. Louis fell asleep for 15 minutes, curled up on a gold couch. Charlotte fixed her hair with help from a lady-in-waiting. George stood by a window, watching the crowd still gathering outside. Then it was time for the balcony appearance. This was a tradition that went back many years. After every big royal event, the family would stand on the balcony of Buckingham Palace to greet the people. A palace helper came to get the children. "It's time," she said with a smile. "Everyone is waiting." The three children followed their parents through the grand rooms of the palace. The walls were covered with paintings of kings and queens from long ago. Louis looked up at them with curious eyes. "Will they put a painting of Grandpa up there too?" he asked. "Yes, they will," William answered. "And one day there will be paintings of all of us." This made Louis giggle. The idea of having his picture on a palace wall seemed very funny to him. They reached the room behind the balcony. Through the tall windows, they could see the huge crowd filling the space in front of the palace. There were thousands and thousands of people. The noise of their cheering could be heard even through the thick walls. King Charles and Queen Camilla were already there, waiting. The king had changed into a new outfit. He still wore his crown, but his heavy robe was gone. He looked more comfortable now. "Are you ready, children?" he asked with a warm smile. All three nodded. Even Louis looked a little nervous now. The crowd was so big, so loud. Charlotte moved closer to her mother. George stood tall next to his father. The doors to the balcony opened. King Charles and Queen Camilla stepped out first. The roar from the crowd was like nothing the children had ever heard before. It was like the sound of the ocean in a storm. Then it was their turn. William and Kate stepped onto the balcony with their three children. The cheering grew even louder when people saw the young princes and princess. George stood very straight, taking in the amazing view. Thousands of faces looked up at them. Thousands of hands waved flags. It was like looking at a sea of red, white, and blue. Charlotte waved gracefully, a natural smile on her face. She spotted someone holding a sign with her name on it. That made her smile even bigger. Louis, after a moment of being overwhelmed, began to wave with great energy. His face lit up with pure joy. This was the most exciting thing ever. All these people had come to see them. It was amazing. The royal family stood together on the balcony, waving to the crowds below. They were not just figures from history books or characters in a fairy tale. They were real people sharing a special moment with their country. The day after the coronation, people all over the world were talking about King Charles and his new role. But they were also talking about something else. The three royal children who had brought such warmth and realness to the historic event. Newspapers and websites showed pictures of the children on their front pages. There was Louis yawning during the ceremony, Charlotte singing with the choir, and George performing his royal duty with perfect care. The images captured not just a coronation, but the human side of the royal family. In the morning, Kate was looking at some of these stories on her tablet. She smiled as she read the kind words people were saying about her children. They had just been themselves, and that was exactly what people had loved. "What are you reading, Mummy?" Charlotte asked, coming into the room still in her pajamas. "People are writing nice things about you and your brothers," Kate said. "They thought you were all wonderful yesterday." Charlotte climbed onto the sofa next to her mother to look at the pictures. She giggled when she saw one of Louis making a funny face. "He was so bored," she said, "but he did try to be good." "Yes, he did," Kate agreed, "and people loved that he was just being himself." There was a picture of Charlotte singing along with the choir. Her face looked so happy and lost in the music. "I didn't know they took my picture when I was singing," she said, surprised. "You brought music to the day in your own special way," Kate told her. "The choir director even sent a note this morning. He wants to invite you to a special practice with the choir next month." Charlotte's eyes grew wide with excitement. Something wonderful had come from just being herself and following her love of music. George came in, already dressed for the day. He was always the most organized of the three children. He looked at the tablet over his mother's shoulder. "Is that me?" he asked, seeing a picture of himself presenting the orb to King Charles. "Yes, and everyone is saying how perfectly you did your part," Kate said. "Your grandfather is very proud of you." George smiled, a real smile that lit up his serious face. "It wasn't as scary as I thought it would be," he admitted. "Not once I started doing it." Louis bounced into the room last, full of energy as always. "Are there pictures of me?" he asked, jumping onto the sofa. "Did I look handsome?" This made everyone laugh. Louis always said exactly what he was thinking. "Yes, there are many pictures of you," Kate told him, showing him one where he was waving from the balcony. "People loved your big wave and your big smile." "And my big yawn?" Louis asked with a cheeky grin. "Yes, that too," Kate said, ruffling his hair. "That might be the most famous yawn in the world now." William joined his family, bringing a tray of breakfast things. "What are we all looking at?" he asked. "Pictures of us being famous," Louis told him importantly. William sat down with them. "You know," he said to his children, "yesterday was about Grandpa becoming king. It was a very serious and important day, but you three reminded everyone of something just as important." "What did we remind them?" Charlotte asked. "That even in the middle of big historic moments, we're still a family. We still have fun and get tired and make mistakes and help each other. And people need to see that." George thought about this, so it was good that Louis yawned, and that Charlotte sang, and that I was nervous before my part. "Exactly," William said. "People saw themselves in you. Not everyone can understand what it's like to be king or queen, but everyone knows what it's like to be bored at a long event, or to love music, or to be nervous about doing something important." The children nodded, beginning to understand. By just being themselves, they had helped make the monarchy seem more real and relatable to people. Later that day, a special delivery arrived at the palace. It was 3 small boxes, one for each child. Inside each box was a tiny crown made of silver. A note with them said, "For the young royals who stole the nation's hearts."